Ken Coates, and he asked me not to call him doctor, although he has credentials piled higher and deeper than most, is the Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Saskatchewan. Ken was raised in Whitehorse, Yukon, and has a long-standing professional and personal interest in Aboriginal rights, Northern development, Northern Canadian history, science, technology, and society, and Japan studies. Ken is currently working on a series of books, including a reflection on the significance of the Idle No More movement, a study of the development of the Canadian light source at the University of Saskatchewan, the first ever history of the circumpolar subarctic, and an examination of the overexpansion of the global university system. Ken appears regularly on television and radio, largely in association with his work on Aboriginal issues, Northern Canada, and post-secondary education. His opinion pieces have been published in newspapers and magazines across Canada, and we do have a full bio for Ken on our website. And if you would now please join me in a warm welcome for Ken Coates, who's going to impart some wisdom.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm not sure how much wisdom you'll find. Let me just start by saying how pleased I am to be here. You'll discover as I go through that I am a huge fan of the skilled trades and the apprenticeship program, and deeply, deeply worried about the challenge that you face and the lack of receptiveness in the population at large. So we'll come back to that. Very thrilled to be welcomed so warmly onto Puyallup territory. It's an honor always to be welcomed by Indigenous people into their homelands, and I'm delighted to be here as well. I would also like to sort of draw attention to two things. One is I apologize for wearing a suit. That is entirely my wife's doing. She insists that I put a suit and tie on, and I keep telling I'm talking to real people. I don't need a suit and tie. But anyway, so you can write her, KarenHolroyd@gmail.com. And you can tell her I did not need a suit today and that I feel like a penguin standing in front of all you wonderful folks. The second thing is you'll notice that not only are, you've got 4 people speaking so far and 2 of us are Canadians. This is actually a sign that civilization is actually moving south finally. But I will also tell you today that the most significant southward migration of civilization in the Pacific Northwest actually happened today. Seattle has an NHL franchise. So if you really want our insight and our knowledge and our wisdom, we will explain the rules of hockey to you a little bit later on. It involves a lot of fighting and punching and saying you're sorry. So I want to start off, if you don't mind, with a little bit of historical context. One a long time ago and one sort of more recent to sort of put in context what you're doing. Skills and skilled trades are absolutely essential. And some of you may have had a bit of a history background and will know about Jamestown, Virginia. This is a community that was the first permanent settlement in what's now the United States, 1607 or something like that. That was a long, long time ago. I don't know if you know that Jamestown basically collapsed because of an absence of skilled trades. The people who brought the colony together decided that you had to have a colony, you had to have a whole range of people there. So they brought educated people and ministers and poets and all these kind of upper-classy kind of folks, right? But they didn't bring enough skilled tradespeople. And because the skilled tradespeople were working really hard, they actually all died really fast because the Chesapeake area was all sorts of diseases and things. And anyway, what happened was in the absence of skilled trades, you actually have a situation where people were starving to death and doing lawn bowling at the same time because they didn't know how to do skilled trades work. And basically the community collapsed. Of 250 people they brought over, only 60 were alive the next spring because they did not have enough skilled tradespeople. So if you wonder if you're really relevant, that's a good starting point. But the second part, I think, is more important because it applies to virtually everybody in this room, and certainly people sort of my age and my vintage. The greatest accomplishment, I think the greatest accomplishment in North America after the Second World War was actually a very, very simple one. We managed in the war created a whole bunch of demand for skilled labor. All of a sudden, the manufacturing sector expanded, the science and technology fields grew. You had thousands of new companies being created to sort of bring technology and bring all this manufacturing together throughout North America. In the process and going into the 1950s and 60s, we did something that had never happened before. We provided high-wage, stable jobs for skilled tradespeople. If you go back before World War II, we had lots of skilled tradespeople, but they lived very uncertain lives. Companies didn't treat them particularly well. Wages weren't very good. The stability wasn't there. They had to migrate from job to job and community to community. What we did after World War II, and if you ever wonder whether we need or value unions, the answer is yes. The answer is a big, hearty, wildly enthusiastic yes, because the unions fought for their employees in a time of rapid economic expansion and secured good jobs, high salaries, and good benefits. So, was this about making skilled tradespeople wealthy? Well, first off, there's nothing wrong with that. But secondly, this actually changed the very foundations of North American life. All of a sudden, the skilled tradespeople were in the middle to upper middle classes. All of a sudden, it was commonplace for people working in factories and doing the skilled trades to earn above average incomes. Not below average incomes, which was the norm before, but high incomes. So I graduated from high school in 1974. And I know every one of you saying you look way too young to have graduated in 1974, but unfortunately that's true. I had a bunch of friends in high school who didn't go on to university. They just stayed behind, and many of them became skilled tradespeople, some of them became apprentices and whatever. There's a real difference between those folks and me. They're retired. They got really good jobs in the mid-70s. They worked in construction, they worked in mines, they worked in building the cities, they worked in electrical systems, they worked on hydro plants. They worked and they worked and they worked. And they made a lot of money. And they stayed at home. And they didn't go to university and invest in university education, all that kind of stuff. And almost all of them are now retired. And I'm singing for my breakfast here in Tacoma and enjoying myself completely. So it's interesting because just think about this for a second, because this is at risk. This is at risk. We're in a globalized economy. Not finger pointing at anybody. We're in a globalized economy. The work is changing very rapidly. I'm going to talk about some of the technological changes as we go along. But we are in the midst of a huge transformation. So for example, a small American company and a Canadian company called General Motors just closed one plant in Ontario and 3 plants in the United States. Essentially, they're moving to low-wage areas in southern United States and also in Mexico. So in Canada, it's actually not all that large a number. It's only 2,500 skilled tradespeople basically losing their jobs. And Canada is doing fairly well right now, so we'll absorb them sort of somewhere else. But we'll absorb them into lower salaried positions without the benefits packages from before. And the only way that they can actually keep that standard of living that they've aspired to is actually to move to British Columbia, where there's a huge shortage of skilled tradespeople. But that means uprooting your family and moving across the continent and all that sort of thing. So after World War II, we did something quite miraculous. We created a more equal society, where people who worked with their hands, people who had technical skills, highly skilled individuals with great expertise, were actually able to turn that into a very good and prosperous lifestyle. We had lots of people who worked in the manufacturing sector in Ontario who'd make $100,000 a year plus. They had the nice house, and they had the RV, and they had the cabin, and things of that sort. If you look at what's going on in our industrial workplace now, many of those jobs are being replaced either by robots or being replaced in other countries. So we are facing a very different sort of environment. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the challenges that we face. Won't throw out a whole bunch of numbers for you because that just scares everybody. But here's some of the issues. You have your workforce is aging. The skilled trades in North America are really old. And you're losing people way faster out the other end of retirement than you are actually filling up with sort of a good solid body underneath. We have shortages, and it's interesting that the shortage numbers are really misleading. Because in Canada and in the United States, they'll say, oh, we're short 20,000 Not to criticize your numbers, but when you say we're short these numbers, 73,000 workers, or we have all these skilled tradespeople, that is only existing companies with existing work looking for existing employees. That means that's how many they're missing today. What we don't talk about is how there are literally hundreds of companies that would expand their operations, would take on new projects, would open new factories, would do new things. We are short millions of skilled tradespeople. Not a few thousand here and a few thousand there. We are short millions, and we're missing out on hundreds of billions of dollars of economic activity because we do not have that pipeline that we are all talking about here as well. We obviously don't have enough apprentices. I'm a massive fan of apprenticeships. I think we probably should be getting to 25% of high school graduates should be going off into apprenticeship if we actually marketed it properly and had the right levels of support and all that kind of stuff. But notice something. And I spend a lot of time with young people because I'm a university prof and I talk about universities and college education and polytech education and things of that sort. But notice something. Talking about the fact that, that people can earn a decent salary, good salary, have a good career, and find a job isn't enough. And think about that for a second. We think that works. We think we go to a high school and say, well, you guys are all trying to contemplate, young men and women, what you're going to do in the future. If you get an apprenticeship, we can almost guarantee you a good job. If you get into the apprenticeship program, you'll get skills, you'll get training, you'll have a good income. And then you go back and you think, wow, they really like that. And one person signs up out of that cohort, not 30. Just talking about wages and jobs actually is not enough. And I think that should worry us a little bit. There's not enough interest. So that is the question. The question is, why not? Right? Why are young people not engaged in the apprenticeship fields, and what is actually going on? So I'll come back to this part at the end, but essentially this is what they call an existential crisis. The viability and long-term profitability of the North American economy and Canada and the United States is at risk. You need to be massively successful. We need to get the message out to way more people, way more politicians, members of the public, parents, and everybody else to actually see the world move along in a very coherent and sort of rapid sort of fashion. So let me talk about some of the issues here at hand, the future of work. So let me talk about what I think is one of the sort of basic problems. And how many people here were raised in small towns? How many people here were raised in big cities? I feel sorry for you. So it's interesting, about 3/4 of you here were actually raised in small towns, and this actually matters. So my wife is from Vancouver. Have you all been to Vancouver? There's about the world's most beautiful, wonderful city. It's Seattle with mountains, right? And less coffee. So, you know, it's really interesting. My wife's born that I always say to Karen when we're talking about things that, you know, the only problem about being raised in Vancouver is you had no life. Because everybody does exactly the same thing. You know, there's just, you get on the bus and you go here and there. I was raised in Whitehorse. Do you know what I did when I grew up? I helped my father build a cabin. I helped my friends dismantle their vehicles. I tried to rebuild them from time to time. We had cars that broke down in the middle of the woods. We had cars go off the road in the wintertime, and we had to figure out how to winch them out of the ditch. We did all these rural things. When I was 12 years old, I could use a chainsaw. When I was 12 years old, 2 years before I was legally allowed to, I could drive a car. And people who grow up in farming areas drive tractors. They can do all these really interesting things. And people in cities, like, when I was 11, I got to ride the bus by myself to go downtown. Big whoopee deal. That is not a foundation for a life as a skilled tradesperson, right? You actually have to work with your hands. I was delighted to hear that Oregon is adding shop classes back into the schools. What in the heck happened that we thought it was okay to allow access to probably 1/3 of all the good jobs in the North American economy disappear from high schools? That's literally outrageous. And yet we had, not just Oregon, they did this all around North America. Oh, we can't afford it. I'm an historian. Let's put another history class on. I love history. I also took mechanics and drafting, and I also took woodworking. I have scars and stitches to prove I took woodworking, right? We have created a world in which young people basically do not work with their hands. It's exacerbated by the fact that we actually now live in a society that no longer fixes things. If you think of the implications of the fact that we have a disposable world, Again, if we had our toaster breakdown, I can remember my father. We have, actually, my mom just passed away last week, and we went to her house, her apartment, and she has the toaster that we had in 1964. And my father tore it apart at least 3 or 4 times. Took it apart, fixed it, broke it, replaced things, soldered things on all by himself, right? So now what happens when you have a toaster? Have you ever tried to take a toaster back to get it repaired? They just laugh at you. And they say, you can buy the same one for $40. Why would you spend $120 getting it fixed, right? I took a printer back to get it repaired at a printing shop, well, at a computer shop, and they said, oh, don't bother. The most expensive part of a printer is actually the ink cartridge in it. The rest of it is just a receptacle for an ink cartridge. And so they said, well, don't bother fixing it. It'll cost you $300 to fix it and $120 to replace it. So think of the implications of this, that we don't tinker anymore. Young people play video games. They don't tinker. Anybody, you grew up with a Meccano set? Only Canadians. That's why we're so much better looking. It must be because of Meccano sets. So the interesting thing here is that young people do not have experience working with their hands. They don't fix it. They don't go to your average urban center, urban community, take a bunch of logs out there and throw out a chainsaw and say, hey, go and cut some wood and see what happens. Some people will be able to do it. I'm not saying they all can't, but they have no experience. They haven't been introduced to that in a systematic way. So that's bad enough. Now we're in a period of rapid technological change. And I think this is something we have to pay very close attention to. We are seeing an enormously rapid expanse of robots. And the numbers on robots are very simple. If you can replace a human worker with a robot at a cost of $100,000, dish the job. Get rid of the job. Bring in the robots to do the welding, bring in the robots to do the assembly, bring in the robots to do a whole bunch of things. Interestingly, this is about to get a whole bunch more attention. Not because it's gone after industrial workers and the skilled trades, but because it's now the robots and all those things are now going to go after the professions. So wait until you hear people scream when you discover accountants can't find jobs because the digital robots are taking over. And when the doctors can't find jobs because we're using new technologies to replace many of the doctors. Lawyers. Across North America, this is the only good news in the technological revolution. The only good news is there's nowhere near as many jobs. A 40% decline in the number of people applying for law degrees in the last 2 years. Why? Because they can't get jobs when they graduate. Why don't they get jobs when they graduate? You remember the old days that people used to get an articling position? And you get for a year, you'd work for a lawyer for 1 or 2 years, you'd practice and do, it's kind of a legal apprenticeship, and that sort of a model is a really great sort of model. They borrowed it from you. And you look at that and you think, what's going on now? Well, actually, a computer can do the work the articling students used to do. And they can do it in 45 seconds that you would have taken a month for somebody to sort of do that as an articling student. So laws declining, accountancy is going to decline. We're seeing all these kinds of things happen left, right, and center. And the interesting piece about this technological change is we are really only at the first step of a 100-yard race. Why is that? If you look at the number of scientists and technologists, the number of people who are inventing new things, about 90 to 95% of all the scientists who've ever walked on the face of the earth are alive and working today. 90 to 95% of all the scientists we've ever had are actually out there trying to figure out how to replace work, how to bring in new machines, new technologies, new systems to actually replace work, among other things. So artificial intelligence is accelerating this. The implications of artificial intelligence are simply staggering. Virtual reality, it's actually one of our solutions for training apprenticeships is actually using virtual reality systems. If you want to know how they work, go and visit the armed forces. The U.S. military is an absolute world leader in using virtual reality to train people how to do things. It started with fighter pilots, now with tank operators. It's actually going through the entire system. Augmented reality is going to improve and facilitate technical training and technical skills development very, very quickly. So the problem with this is all good, right? In one sense, these are all good and exciting things. They'll make things cheaper, they'll make things faster. Now they're going to displace thousands and thousands of workers. We don't know how many. But the problem is this stuff is going so fast. Let me use 2 examples out of areas that you'll be familiar with here in the West Coast. It's basically about social media. Social media is one really good example. We didn't regulate social media. Remember, because it was only 13-year-old girls using it. Girls were using it to talk to each other, right? And as soon as 13-year-old girls have something, 14-year-old boys follow along. But if you go 10 years down the line, the 13-year-old girls are 23, the boys are 23, right? And they're using this very expansively. We just sort of thought, oh, this is harmless. Anybody now think social media is harmless? Social media is destroying the lives of high school girls. The bullying that goes on through social media alone is unbelievably destructive. Student anxiety levels are absolutely going through the roof, just skyrocketing, which is a horrible thing to watch. We look what happens to politics, you know, the way in which political processes are changing, being manipulated through different kinds of social media. I'm not trying to pick on that, because e-commerce is exactly the same thing. It's a big industry here in the Pacific Northwest. It's just that it happened without us thinking about it, right? So all of a sudden you wake up one day and go, oh, we should have regulated that Google company. We should have done something about Facebook to make sure they operated in a different way. Most industries have regulation. You know how hard it is to regulate something 20 years after they got founded? It's really, really hard. E-commerce, the same thing. Here in the Northwest, you know, you actually shared your headquarters with Virginia and New York City, your Amazon headquarters number 2. E-commerce is destroying small town businesses left, right, and center. In smaller towns, in towns of 1,000 people, whatever, the stores are closing down because you can buy almost all the things you want off of that. Not saying it's a bad idea. I do e-commerce shopping all the time. I don't like to go to stores. But the reality is it happened without us thinking about it. We just let it occur. And I think we're doing exactly the same thing with all these other technologies. There's a pretty good chance we're going to wake up 10 years from now and say, we should have thought a little bit more about those robot-y things. Because, you know, who's going to buy the stuff these robots are making, because there's nowhere near enough of us out there making a decent income anymore. Not that we stop it, but that we be intentional about it. So what's going on in terms of jobs lost and jobs created? Short answer is we don't know. You get all sorts of forecasts. Forecasts all over the place. Some people say we're going to lose millions of jobs. The standard analysis is we're going to lose between 25 and 50% of our jobs will either be destroyed by new technologies or transformed by new technologies. And the word transformed is an interesting one, because basically it means the work is going to go from being semi-skilled and skilled into sort of technology-driven. So again, go back to General Motors. General Motors has announced in the last little while that they are expanding their presence in Southern Ontario. Now remember, they're closing a plant. 2,500 workers. Oshawa was always influenced by the auto industry. It was the center of General Motors' operation. So General Motors says, yeah, we're closing that down. But you know, over here, they're hiring about 1,000 engineers. And those engineers are going to design autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. So you lose these workers over here. Oh, by the way, those are your workers. Those are your skilled trades workers. And what we're going to do is hire people with university degrees and master's degrees in electrical engineering over here, pay them really good salaries, and they're going to assemble the vehicles some other country or some other place. So these transitions are really going to be hard. And will they work to the benefit of skilled trades? Actually, on balance, I think they will. I think the skilled trades are going to change for reasons I'll talk about in a second. But I think on balance, the skilled trades will find themselves in a sort of a much better position. But other people argue that when you get these technological transitions, that new jobs emerge, jobs that people never thought about before. So I'll use a classic example. If automated trucks work, and automated trucks do work, by the way, they work really quite well. You know how every time there's an accident, it becomes a national headline? You know, person run over by Tesla automated vehicle. And, oh, this is all terrible, we can't have these. And when you discover down the line, it's very unfortunate to discover that somebody stepped off the curb in front of a car. Well, it was a Tesla, and it did hit them, but it wasn't because the technology failed, it was because of accidents happen around human beings. Imagine if they did the same thing around 17-year-old males. Every time a 17-year-old male had a significant accident, and they made it into a national headline, I don't know, I've got 5 kids, got 7 grandkids, been through this sort of before. In our world, we basically say that for males, 18 is the new 15. For girls, actually, 18 is the new 22. So we're in the process of women taking over the world, which is really nice to see. But the boys are really having struggles. They're coming out of high school immature, which is one of the reasons it's hard to get them into skilled trades, because they're actually having trouble thinking beyond Saturday night. let alone sort of thinking 3 and 5 years down the line. Young ladies, they are thinking exactly that way in a great generalization. So we don't know what's going to happen about how these transitions will occur, how many jobs will appear, how many jobs will disappear. But to put a somewhat different line on this, we now have in North America what I think is one of our fundamental problems, and is what I call career paranoia. Now, this will terrify you. Anybody here have teenage kids in their house? A few of you have teenage kids in your house. The average age of those kids leaving home in North America is 27 years. So all those people who are laughing are the ones who already went through this and got rid of them at 19, and they're going, you're stuck with them. I've got a 17-year-old daughter, almost 18-year-old daughter. I think I signed up for 18 years. I did not sign up for 27 years, right? I want you planning to get out of here as soon as you can. So you have those movies that call Failure to Launch. You know, that is young America. It is young Canada. People are having real difficulty getting out and getting on. Parents are terrified. They are terrified. In the industrial heartland of Ontario and sort of the Ohio and Pennsylvania and places like that, over half of the jobs that millennials have are short-term contingent jobs. They are not working for a full-time employer on a full-time basis, getting benefits and all that kind of stuff. We have literally millions of young people who are working for 5 and 10 and 15 years without a benefits program. They're making work their job here, and they go a month over here, and 6 months over here, a year over here, and back to a couple of months over there. Young people are terrified. We've done a really good job. We've added a few other things like climate change, the rise of China, all the turmoil in the world that's going on in terms of Brexit and populism and all these kinds of things. So we've actually done a really good job of mucking up their brains. They are terrified. And at the heart of that terror is actually the question of career paranoia. Where do I go to get a job? Parents, I can assure you, are really, really nervous about this. We have very different patterns, by the way, in Canada and the United States. In the United States, you spend a ferocious amount of money on post-secondary education, particularly on universities. And you spend a staggering amount of money as a country on trying to get a large number of students into a small number of really elite colleges. Right? The research, by the way, is really interesting. The research shows that the single most important thing you can do to help your children succeed is to get them in a classroom or a school with other smart, motivated kids. Doesn't matter about the teachers, curriculum doesn't matter so much. There's all these things you tweak education. The biggest thing that you can actually do is to get your kids into an elite school where the other kids are smart and the other kids are working hard, which is why American students, or American families, bankrupt themselves to pay $50,000 a year tuition fees to get them into the Lewis and Clarks of the world, Reed College, one of my favorite places around, to get them into the University of Washington, to go into the really top elite schools, because that's where they'll see real opportunities. And you are seeing literally thousands and millions of families who are putting themselves financially at risk to try to give their kids a chance through the university system. Well, here's the part that really bothers me. The university system doesn't work very well. So I love universities. I've benefited from universities, worked in them all my professional career. But we have a couple of problems in universities. We have way too many universities. We have way too many young people in universities. So just basic rule of thumb, if your high school kids don't read, please do not send them to university. If they do not read on a regular basis, they will probably fail. And not just fail a little bit, they'll probably crash and burn with spectacular effect. And students who go to university and don't complete university actually have the same earning pathway as the students who never go to university or college at all. In other words, you're better not to go if you're going to fail. So is that a big problem? 50% of the people who start universities in the United States do not finish. Recent numbers have suggested it's 60%. Lower than that in Canada, very different. Canadian universities, if you're interested, are way, way cheaper. The best educational deal in the world is probably in Canada. We charge our students like $6,000 to go to an elite school. It's much easier to get in than it is to American schools, so Harvard has a 5 or 6% acceptance rate after a massive process of self-selection. The top universities in Canada have an acceptance rate of 70 to 75%. right? So we have a very different model. We don't invest as much. We don't go into bank. We don't talk about Canadians going bankrupt because we actually, the net amount of government money for loans and bursaries and all those kinds of things actually exceeds the amount of money spent on tuition. So as a country, we give away more money for university than we actually cost to go to university. We don't have the same sort of problem. But the numbers in the States are really frightening. And you sit there in the, I'll hear you talk, and you're so proud of your work, and you're so sure of the impact, because you're right. You are right about the impact of apprenticeships and the importance of apprenticeships. You're absolutely right about this, right? So in the university system, where people are climbing over themselves to get in New York City, you can spend $35,000 hiring somebody to write your students and your child's admission essay so they can try to hoodwink their way into the best possible schools. You can do all these kind of really write essays and do exams and tell you how to volunteer, what you should volunteer in grade 10, volunteer in grade 11. It's like, holy, what's this got to do with whether you're going to be a good university student or not? All that effort, right? Here's the numbers. 100 students go into university in their first year. 50% of them will not graduate, and that's actually a low number. Of the 50% who graduate, only half of them will get a job that requires a university degree. So of 100 kids who start university, 25 get a degree. Now, does that sound like your apprenticeship programs? Are those the same outcomes? Do you have a 50% failure rate? And do you have a situation where if they get their degree and they graduate, they don't get a job in their field? In your case, the students who don't get jobs don't want them. The students who don't get a job as a sheet worker or metal worker, they just didn't want to work in that. They did their 4 years and don't want to do it. They want to do something else. So we have this massive dropout rate, this massive budget crisis, and a huge crisis of underemployment that is sweeping across the university system. So why? What is going on in a world where you know there are people who need your skilled trades. You know the companies are clamoring for it. You know that they're exciting, diverse, and interesting jobs. What's actually going on? So the first thing is the undervaluing of the skilled trades. And this is so ironic. Interestingly, by the way, this pattern applies equally to people who are skilled trades themselves. They often undervalue skilled trades. They will try to talk their kids out of becoming a skilled tradesperson. And they'll make a huge effort. Yeah, I went there and I made a whole bunch of money and gave you a good life, and I gave you a good life so you didn't have to go and work in the factory. You didn't have to go and work up at the top of electrical power lines in the middle of 35 degree below weather. I come from Saskatchewan. I could do a really interesting test and find out how many of you know how to spell it, let alone where it is. Most Americans don't. But our temperatures in the summertime are 26 above. That's our numbers. What do they call that in Fahrenheit? 80 degrees in the summertime, and not uncharacteristic to be 40 below in the wintertime. So it makes us tough, it makes us strong, and it makes us smile a lot when we get invited to the Pacific Northwest. You have a situation where even the people who've benefited personally from a skilled trades career will often try to talk their kids out of it. And you want a really simple case in point. You go on YouTube, and you can find literally hundreds of thousands of videos of Mary opens her acceptance letter from Harvard, or Bobby opens his acceptance letter from Cornell. And they'll have this picture, and they go online and click, and it goes, "We are pleased to welcome you." Everybody goes screaming and yelling. I looked to see if I could find a single video of an exciting announcement of a family member who got accepted into an apprenticeship program. There's not a single, now you might hope you can find them. I have not been able to find a single video that says, "Hooray, I get to be an electrician." But you do that for even people going into fairly mediocre schools when you look at them and talk to them for 5 minutes and say, "You're going to fail." I can tell. You haven't read anything. Maybe a manga comic or something like that. You haven't read anything for years, and you think you're going to succeed in university. So we have a real problem. So why are we undervalue the skilled trades? You offer jobs, right? You offer good incomes, right? You offer considerable career progression. If you actually watch what happens, one of the things you should talk about more in the skilled trades is how many of your skilled trades people become entrepreneurs and actually become business owners. The number of electricians who end up owning electrical shops is through the roof. The number of plumbers who end up opening plumbing shops is through the roof. These are folks who, they don't count as skilled tradespeople anymore because they're business people. But they're making a $400,000 a year running a 35-member operation. get the numbers on that and start talking about it as one of your pathways. It isn't just a pathway to apprenticeship and going senior this and senior that, and now we get to be a mentor. Those are all really important, absolutely valuable. But also you can go there, and you all know people who've done this, right? And they have really, really good lives. So what is actually going on? You got a great story, and people aren't paying attention to it. I think it's Taylor Swift's fault. So I have a 17-year-old daughter. I have listened to Taylor Swift for many, many years. And I'm embarrassed to tell you how many of her songs I can sing without any prompting, which I promise very much not to do. So Taylor Swift has a bunch of songs in which she talks about escaping small towns, going to the big city, getting rid of the sort of the working class culture, moving away from that kind of stuff. In fact, we are losing the popular culture wars like you would not believe. If we could get Taylor Swift to write 2 songs about falling in love with sheet metal workers, you would have a huge spike in the number of people. I'm just trying to support your cause over here, right? You'd have a huge increase. What's that? Roofers are really hard. He said, what about roofers, right? Come to Saskatchewan in November, and I'll tell you what the problem with roofers are, right? It's kind of cold up there. But no, my point is this. This is actually a culture war. You're not going to win a culture war with numbers. You're not going to win a culture war by talking about how much money you can earn, or about the fact that you can get a job in different kind of places. So you have a chance to travel the world. We had, in Saskatchewan and British Columbia as well, whenever you have a downturn in the economy, our skilled tradespeople are never unemployed. They just say, oh, I'm going to go work in Kazakhstan. And I'll fly over and do 2 weeks in Kazakhstan and 2 weeks home. I don't want to go to Kazakhstan? I'll go to Nunavut, and I'll work in one of the mines up in Nunavut. Don't want to go there? Go to the North Sea and work in England. Right? People migrate all over the place. I was in Qatar a little while ago and was talking to some people about the number of Canadian skilled tradespeople in Qatar. It's through the roof. These people are making $200,000 tax-free, plus free housing, plus free travel, and wow. Makes being a university professor sound like a pretty bad gig. We are losing a popular culture war. So the question back to you as a group is, what are you doing to win the popular culture wars? What are you doing to sort of let parents and kids and society as a whole know about all the different kinds of opportunities there are? So I had one big dig at President Obama. It's not a partisan political observation. Canadians have learned to shut up about American politics. We do giggle, but we do not talk about them in any particular way. Don't take sides. But President Obama had some wonderful characteristics. But I remember a couple of times listening to him talk about the fact that he wanted to have 70 to 80% of American students going to college. There are no jobs for 70 to 80% of American high school students going to college and then hoping to go on and get into the workforce. That is not the workforce of the present, and is not, despite all these claims about the high-tech, high-education economy, not the one of the future. I'm not sure, you must have long conversations here in the Northwest about coding. You have a lot of pressure in building coding programs and all this kind of stuff, right? The consensus in the industry is we actually don't need that many coders. Why not? Because they're way cheaper in India. They're way cheaper in Bangladesh and Pakistan. We can find coders all over the place. It's a technical skill, and other places are producing a lot of them. Plus, our guys are so smart, and the women who are doing all this coding are so bright that they've actually created code that writes code. And so as you look 20 years down the line, you're not actually going to have to do as much coding as we think. But coding, that's good modern 21st century stuff. Electricians and roofers, still having trouble with the roofers. The electricians, that's hard. That's hard to sell, which just makes no sense whatsoever. So we have to, I think, rebuild a skilled economy and rebuild a skilled workforce. And a big part of that is building pride back in the enterprise. How do you convince people that what they're doing is absolutely fundamental? We have done a really loud, I'm not talking about you. You live your lives, you talk about this all the time. You are the ones who are standing up and being counted, so please don't take it that way. But our politicians don't. Try to get a national or state politician to come, and maybe they do, to come and talk to your apprenticeship class. And ask them to do it the same day that they're actually having asked them to do a convocation address at the University of Washington. Which one will they pick? They'll pick the high-profile university one. We have nowhere near enough politicians who actually have been skilled tradespeople, who actually have the experience and know what it all represents. So we have to sort of get a different message out there. And the message I would encourage you to consider is, do talk about jobs that are vacant. Do talk about the wages that you actually have. Do add in more about entrepreneurship, how skilled trades leads to entrepreneurship. But also start talking about the delay in economic growth. The impact of inefficient and incomplete apprenticeship programs is not just in current jobs that are not filled. I've said this once, I'll probably keep saying it again. It also has to do with a number of jobs that are not even on offer because you cannot find enough workers. It's kind of interesting, in the province of Ontario, Ontario has about 11 million people, so it's a big place. And right now, there are 2 million people in Ontario who can't find work. It's long-term unemployed. We're not talking about here people who are out of work for a month or two. These are long-term unemployed. At the same time, in Ontario, we have 2 million jobs that they can't find any workers for. And most of them are unadvertised. Why would a company keep spending a couple $100 a week advertising for jobs when nobody applies? So they don't advertise. So 2 million vacancies and 2 million things over here, and there's almost no connection. These people don't have the skills for the jobs. So everybody assumes, they say, oh, we better expand our university programs. Please stop. You need to expand the apprenticeship programs. You need to talk to employers, figure out precisely what they need, and work on some sort of pathway as it goes forward. Now in Canada, we have a safety valve that you don't have in quite the same way, and that's Canadian immigration. Canada has a very open immigration policy. We let in 350,000 new people into our country every year. Plus we have short-term help. I was standing, you may have heard of Fort McMurray, it's where the oil sands are. It's the third largest sort of deposit of energy in the world. And more than once I've been standing in the line getting on the plane, and I've had 10 people from China standing behind me. And they're all temporary workers. They come over for the companies and they work for a month here, and then they go home for a month. Work for a month, go home for a month, right? We have very flexible arrangements. If you've got a company in Saskatchewan or in Alberta and you're short electricians or roofers, and you really want to sort of figure out what you need some of these people to come in, you can go to the Immigration Canada and say, we've been advertising for 4 months, we can't find anybody in these fields, will you let us bring in other workers? My favorite story involves a Saskatchewan company that was expanding like crazy, so they hired 40 Romanian electricians. You know, they brought them over, and the idea was their families would come over. They were not just coming to work, they were coming to move over here. Well, Canada's a great country, this is a great opportunity, and about a week and a half after they arrived in Saskatchewan, the company went broke. So you've migrated from Romania, you've come over here to Saskatchewan, now you have no jobs. Within 24 hours, there were 2 Alberta companies that phoned up and said, I'll hire all of them. If they were good enough for you, they're good enough for me, have them come over to us in Alberta. So we have a pattern in Canada. Your system's nowhere near as flexible. It's much harder to get workers in and to get bunches of workers in. In fact, in the northern areas of Canada, many of our skilled workforce made up largely from people outside the country. One of the world's largest and perhaps the world's best aluminum plant is in Keynote, British Columbia. And in the initial instance, most of the workers came from Portugal. They actually went over to Portugal and they went to communities that had a lot of electricians, a lot of skilled tradespeople, and they said, well, you know, you folks, why don't you just pick up all of you? We'll move 300 workers, 1,200, 1,400 people, move them over to Kitimat all at one time. And we've done that over and over again. So it's a bit of a safety valve. We also in Canada, and I don't know the numbers in the United States, have a huge amount of interprovincial mobility. We have parts of our country that haven't had a really good economic boom for 150 years. The Maritimes, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. And when our economies are growing, British Columbia, when they say there's shortage of jobs, we know that our friend here is actually going to be going out to New Brunswick and the Maritimes and signing up current apprenticeships and Red Seal people by the hundreds to come out of those areas to come back to British Columbia to do the work. So we have those interprovincial and international safety valves. Now, problem with that is that because we have those safety valves, it means governments aren't under as much pressure to actually change the training systems in Canada. Because you know we'll find them somewhere, right? You just find a country around the world where the economy is going down the gurgler, so to see what you can actually do. It works it does work for Canada, but it stops us developing more of our own skills. So you're also seeing the uneven impact of technological change on the trades. Those of you in the construction industry should be pleased to know that in terms of the industrial workforce, you are the laggards in terms of adopting to technological change. The construction industry is moving more slowly than other areas. Lots of other areas, manufacturing, for example, is racing ahead with robotics, racing ahead with artificial intelligence. They've been doing all sorts of just-in-time delivery systems for a long time, but the construction industry has been resistant. Why? Largely because it's such small operations. Right? It's not because you aren't keen or you aren't capable, none of those things at all. But if you've got a factory that has 1,400 employees, you can actually work to coordinate a technological solution. If you've got 5 people over here building some houses and 5 people 20 miles away building some houses, it's really hard to sort of mechanize them in the same sort of way, so don't take that as a criticism. But the other reason the construction industry has trouble, and in serious trouble, it's this phenomena we have, particularly in Canada, but in most of the United States. It's called winter. Now, you don't know what winter is here. Winter is when that rainy stuff turns to white stuff, right? You can actually see it on Mount St. Helens. You can actually see it on some of the coastal mountains around here. But probably, once every 3 years you actually see it here in Seattle. So it doesn't snow very much. And when it does, we'll close school for the day and we'll have some fun, right? So in Saskatchewan, winter starts somewhere around the middle of August and ends around the middle of May. That's just a little bit of an exaggeration. We had snow on the 20th of September this year. And we do have snow in May from time to time. Winter is a reality of a huge part of North American life. And we've actually gone soft. Just to put it in really simple terms, people are soft. They don't want to have to work very hard, which is kind of odd, right? They don't want to be uncomfortable. And when you think of roofing and the business of roofing, roofing is, if it's hot outside, it is incredibly hot. If it's cold outside, it is really cold, right? And people just don't want to do that. Why? Because we've created these hermetically sealed cities where you drive in a car to an underground parking lot, you go into a shopping mall that's basically the size of Bellingham, you walk around inside, you get back in your car, go into your garage, you've actually never gone outside. And in those, 352 days a year where it rains in Seattle and Tacoma, you definitely don't want to go outside because getting wet is uncomfortable. So many of the skilled trades that you're offering, you're talking about pipeline construction, if you're talking about house construction, you're having to work outdoors. And this goes back to the cultural issues I talked before. That is not something you're addressing in your apprenticeship programs. When you go to the schools, are you talking about how much fun it is to work outdoors? Or are you talking about how much nice it is to be out in the sun and fresh air and doing all those kinds of things? About how it makes you strong and hardy and flexible and all that kind of stuff? We've got some real work to do in terms of addressing even the fundamental questions of that. So what's going to come down? What are the trades of the future? So a couple of things I'd say really quickly about what's going on in terms of technology is that our technological revolution has been completely oversold and underestimated, and those things go hand in hand. Do you remember back in the late 1990s when people were talking about the fact that grocery stores would disappear? Do you remember these stores? They were going to have, all you do is go online and go blah, 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 like this, right? Anybody who thought that has never watched a man shop. There is absolutely no way that men would ever go grocery shopping online. You'd end up with a whole bunch of potato chips, lots of pop, a bunch of chocolate, and a couple of steaks, and that would be it, right? Men can't shop like that. This is not how it's ever going to work. But it failed. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars thinking we were going to sort of digitize the entire retail sales food industry. It didn't happen. So we oversold technology all over the place, and we underestimated it. Right? The biggest transition in terms of digital economy and things like that has been on business-to-business relations. It isn't about business-to-customer relations. It's about business working with each other. And that's had a huge transition. It's been very, very substantial. So the number one point to make here, and this is one of these things that we don't talk about often enough, is that the jobs of the future are actually, in large part, going to be the jobs of today. I always see these things when people say, the job your child will be doing, in 2030 doesn't exist today. You know that 90% of the people in the United States are doing jobs that existed in 1900? Well, think about it. Retail clerk. Any retail clerks out there still? Even with all the e-commerce and all that kind of stuff? Drivers of trucks and cars. Well, we have a few people. One of the largest employment sectors is truck driving, right? Mechanics and all those guys. These things are not going to disappear the way we think it is. I'm not sure what idea people have of the future and what that job market is going to look like if we all doing jobs that don't exist today. And they'll come up with things like, genetic technician. Did you hear the controversy about the person in China, I think it was, who said he altered the DNA of a baby? Did you see this one? This actually just came out this last week. A scientist said, I've had the first baby that was ever created where I actually mutated their genes on purpose. Like, this is really freaky stuff. And he's getting criticized, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems. But the interesting thing about that is that there are real social limits on the new technologies and new work we're going to have. So most of the work, can you imagine a robot that will go out at 35 below zero and climb up an electrical power line and actually fix the lines that have snapped? I can't imagine that robot. I can see 100 technologies that can make it safer and better. The technologies can help the work, but this stuff is not all going to disappear. But we will see, I think, some really interesting new areas that will require an immense amount of skilled trades labor to work in these fields. What are they? Alternative energy. If we even do half of what people are talking about, we will need hundreds and hundreds of thousands of skilled tradespeople to install alternative energy capacity across the country. And you know what's going to happen 5 or 7 years after that? We're going to need the same people to go back and replace the ones they put in and to fix the ones that broke down. Wind farms. I love wind farms, other than the fact that they're really noisy and kill birds. But wind farms, they seem very benign and gentle, and you paint them all white. They don't paint them aggressive colors. They paint them gentle white colors. Those things, they torque like crazy. And so the mechanics inside a windmill actually have real trouble sort of maintaining over time. So you have to repair them. Well, who's going to repair them? It's actually going to be a skilled tradesperson. 3D printers. So we won't have as many heavy-duty mechanics as we used to have, because we're going to have modular parts and things of that sort. We're doing all sorts of interesting things. We will have literally millions of 3D printers. The 3D printers now are at this stage where it actually is worth it for you to buy one. You will, within about 1 to 2 years, you will save enough money off of the things you make with a 3D printer to pay for the 3D printer. The problem is everybody thinks 3D printers are big engineering things that are really hard to operate. They're actually not. The number one commercial use of 3D printers, I'm sure you know this already, is chocolates. You actually pour chocolate into the 3D printer, you put your picture in there, and it comes out with a sucker, a chocolate sucker that has your face on it. And you can sell it. Now, does that sound high-tech enough for you? But somebody is going to build the 3D printers, adapt the 3D printers, maintain the 3D printers. This will be a big section. Automated machines, yes, they replace workers, but somebody has to fix the automated machines and install them as we go along. There's huge issues around security and privacy. We're only at the beginning stage of a massive security transformation that will require an enormous number of digital skilled workers to deal with that. We have remotely controlled industrial plants. Mines are being developed that have no human workers involved with them. Well, who installs those mines? Who maintains the technology? It's actually going to be very, very important. So many of the jobs we're going to see in the future will actually be technological adaptations of current work. And you might be working on a much broader scale. You might actually be solving the technological problems remotely. You might not have to go out to a site to actually fix some of these things. So it's very interesting seeing what's actually going on. So we will see some major transformations in the years to come. And one thing that I just tell you is if you look across North America, and the United States, a really good example of this, you built a whole bunch. Remember talking about the post-war era? And remember you built all the interstates? They were, built these all over the place, and you built up big cities. Well, almost all the infrastructure in North America is falling to pieces. And you have to replace sewer systems, you have to replace highways, you have to replace bridges, some of the buildings are coming down. Who's actually going to do that? We have 3D printers that can build houses. In Dubai, they're using 3D printers to build apartment buildings and to build office buildings. So we can use new technologies in some interesting ways. But overwhelmingly, the replacement of the infrastructure in North America, which must occur in the next 20 years. Otherwise, you're going to have whole cities crumbling. You should see what they do in New York to keep New York from sinking. New York has a huge problem with water. Water comes in sort of from all the angles, and it actually is getting underneath the surface. And if they didn't have a massive network of pumps working like crazy to pump out the water underneath New York City, if you actually shut those pumps down, within about 5 years, New York would just settle, right? Down into the water. So do you have any idea who maintains all those pumps and builds all those pumps and looks after them and services them? Those are skilled tradespeople that do that and keep it all going. We need that, to be sure, into the future. So we have a contemporary skills challenge. And I find this one particularly interesting. One of the challenges you face, I don't envy you on this one, you have to do two things simultaneously. You have to prepare young people, in particular, all your apprenticeships, for the jobs of today. You cannot just stop your training programs and immediately start looking into the future. You can't do that. If you do that, they're going to walk out and the companies are going to say, what do you mean you can't frame a house? Oh yeah, but I'm really good at using 3D printers to do some strange things. That's not what the job. You have to prepare people for the jobs of today. But you also have to meet those urgent needs and prepare them for the future as well, which I think is really hard. So what are your basic problems? This is one you will not like to hear. The basic skills training in North American high schools is absolutely abysmal. Basic math, basic literacy, it is not good. We have pockets of places that do it well. I don't know how this shows up in your apprenticeship programs, but the number of students who graduate from, I'll pick on Canada, graduate from Canadian high schools who cannot do basic mathematics and cannot read in any kind of an appropriate way is absolutely staggering. Absolutely staggering. And you need those. I mean, in fact, the requirements in terms of basic skills are going up, not down. You know, an apprentice is going to need more skills in the future. Rather, it's not an unskilled field in order to get into skilled trades. You have to be skilled up in the very first instance. Fortunately, there are some useful pools of population that we can use to expand the apprenticeship programs. You have already mentioned a couple of times today efforts to get women into the system. Absolutely remarkable pool of talented women who are interested in the trades and wanting to go into the trades. You capitalize on that, it's going to be great things. Indigenous people, serious problems in Canada and the United States in terms of on-reserve and on-reservation education. But if you can untap that and unlock that problem, you have great opportunities there. New Canadians, new Americans, you have hundreds of thousands coming into the country. That is a pool that we should be focusing on very, very extensively. But we have to adopt and develop a training culture that is founded in part on technological awareness. It's interesting, right now, when I go back to the career paranoia, right now people are actually getting afraid of technology. They're really not very receptive for technology. In fact, they're fearful of where all of this stuff is going. And every time that there's a factory closes anywhere, it's all, well, it's either the Mexicans who did it, the Chinese who did it, or the robots who did it. Right? And therefore, they're the ones at fault. It's not really our fault at all. We need to get young people involved in an exercise of discovery. They need to be actively involved in the new technologies, seeing what's actually going down. I mean, go back to, I'm delighted about the shops, but I'd love to see how many high schools in your area currently have 3D printers around that students can play with. There's a whole bunch of colleges and universities that don't have 3D printers around that their students can play with. We have to get access to that material. But here's another challenge. How do you prepare people for a life of constant creativity? That is actually really, really difficult. And I'll say it because of this. Young people are not very tech savvy. Just because they can use a smartphone does not mean they actually understand technology at all. And they're also not very curious. And that's a real problem. The third problem, when they do assessments of where do people want to work, the Canada and the United States always get the same two answers. You know what companies North Americans want to work for? There's two companies that always stand out. Any idea who they are? Now, one's Google, the other one's Apple. And they're high-tech companies. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I'm supposed to say Microsoft, so I'll say Microsoft was the third one, even if it wasn't. You can't have Bill Gates as a sort of the face of Microsoft, who's like a super nerdy guy, and have young people really want to work with him. He's a brilliant guy, but he sort of doesn't have the charisma of Steve Jobs and people like that. But anyway, what happens is people love the idea of that campus lifestyle, the ping pong tables around the hall and the free pasta for lunch. That's their image of work, which doesn't make your work very, very attractive in comparison. We have to do far more to prepare them for that. So how do we sustain a trained, highly skilled workforce? We have to create one and sustain it as we go along. A couple of really, really quick observations. This is everybody on deck. And right now, almost nobody's on deck, which is really, except you. But this is a really serious issue. High schools, post-secondary institutions, we have to expand math and basic math and basic science. They actually have to be skill ready, not highly skilled. We have no choice in this particular regard. We got a real problem with trainers and instructors. The problem that's really interesting, your question is, if you're going to expand your apprenticeship program, who are you going to hire to teach? Number one, you're going to hire people who are 63 years old. who just decided they don't want to do roofing anymore, don't want to do electrical work anymore. And they really well trained for 1972. They're not very well trained for 2020. And they might have some real resistance to some of the new technologies and things of that sort, and that's a big jump for them. And what we're discovering in Canada is that when the economy in the trades is so hot that people are sitting there and saying, let's see, I can make $80,000 a year as a college instructor teaching these kinds of technologies, or I can make $180,000 and work for 7 months a year out in the field. How do you get them into your training institutions when the opportunities are so great? So how you actually work with the trainers and instructors to keep them ready and mobilized is really hard. The accrediting agencies have to keep up on new technologies. You have to be as leaders in this process. You have to demand that it's part of the training, not to make sure that they can only do the new stuff, but that they're aware of the new stuff and they get excited about the new stuff and build it in there as well. Your biggest barriers are twofold. One is companies, how you manage employees. Companies are very short-term focused. The difference when you have big companies, the United States has a whole bunch of really big companies, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. Canada, we have almost none. And the ones we have are branch plants of the American ones. But in the United States, at least your big companies manage their staff and manage their employees in a big sort of way. But most of the skilled tradespeople work with small firms. And small firms do not know how to manage for the technological world that we're in. Your biggest problem, again, I think is the government. Government and politicians that will put them together. They're not aware of the needs and not aware of the challenges and aren't working quite as hard. So let me just finish with this. This is a huge challenge. And we're supposed to say the opposite of it's also an opportunity and be all positive and all that kind of stuff. I'll tell you, I'm not very optimistic. You do not have the people on board. You don't have presidents and governors, politicians, education leaders working in the same way. Your high school systems generally across North America are resistant, and they're not up to international standards. If you haven't paid attention to the steady decline in the quality of American high school education, you're missing one of the real fundamental crises facing the United States. In Canada, where we have a higher ranked education system, we have huge and fundamental problems in this area. We're not that much better off at the end of the day. But compared to China, compared to Taiwan, compared to Singapore, compared to Malaysia, compared to South Korea, compared to Japan, these other countries, Finland, for example, Sweden, Norway, Germany, Estonia, these countries are really eating our lunch when it comes to preparing people for the sort of the skilled work of the future. How will the U.S. do in the global competition right now? Not great. Not great. There's many reasons why work is leaving the United States. Sometimes just cheap labor. Sometimes it's because technology makes it so much easier. But there's also reasons why the companies aren't coming to the United States the way they used to. It's because they can get better trained workforce in Germany or in Sweden than they can hope to get here in Canada. So in North America, our responsiveness to new technologies is lagging behind. Our workers and our companies have to learn how to adapt. And we have to be part of a conversation with them. I think this is a place where the apprenticeship programs and the skilled trades programs, all of you people here, can actually lead. You don't just respond to the business environment, you actually have to talk to them and lead them through the work that's going down. How do you do that? Focus on 2050. Get people talking about 2050. What does the world look like in 2050? That's not that far from now, right? I think of my daughter who's going to be 18 in January. 2050, she will be 50, right? She'll be just at what should be the peak of her career in terms of earning potential. I want her post-secondary and her skills training programs to preparing her for 2050. Because right now we're on track as a situation where we will see the opportunities for young people, which are already way smaller than they were in the 60s and 70s. The opportunities for young people are nothing compared to what they were in the 60s and 70s. We'll fall further behind. So we need regional and national conversations about 2050. What kind of world do we want? What world of work do we want? How do we have the skills and training programs to get them there? So in the rest of your conference here, you got some wonderful sessions and you're focusing on exactly what you should focus on. How do you make your programs better? How do you improve details? I love all the emphasis on best practices. Listen carefully to the panels of apprenticeships, telling you things you probably don't want to hear about things they like and don't like. Look very carefully at issues of culture. If you listen to women's experience in apprenticeship programs in Canada, you will find that they are not treated well. There are still work sites where men have naked pictures of naked women in their toolboxes. Not very many, fortunately. But there are problems with the cultural side. Are new Canadians welcome? And new Americans welcome? Are Indigenous people felt comfortable in these kinds of environments? You can work on that. So enjoy that. Enjoy that. Enjoy talking among your friends, looking for great ideas, figuring out where things could go, being excited about all those possibilities. But keep the larger picture in mind. You are actually engaged, and you are the front lines of one of the most fundamental challenges of the 21st century. You know, it's not a comment on the current president about making America great again. America's always been great. America's been a fabulous country. It does really world-leading things in so many different areas. It's a great, great country. But it is not guaranteed, any more than Canada's future prosperity is guaranteed. The chance of there being a sharp reduction in standard of living is very, very real. This generation is the first generation since the Great Depression that has a lower life expectancy than the current generation. This generation will grow up poorer and have more job uncertainty than the last generation. We're not creating the world we want to bequeath to our children as we go along. So the future, just to go back to a point I've already made, the future of the trades is not about technology. It's important. It is about apprenticeships, but that's not the only thing. The real battle, the fundamental battle you have, is a cultural battle. To go out there into the world and convince people that the skilled trades are honorable jobs. They are great jobs. They are great career-building opportunities. They have limitless potential. That the world that you're offering to them is a world beyond their imagination because they're not part of their culture. So work forward and work backward. Go back into the school system, talk to parents, talk to students, get them excited, get those shops up and running, give people a chance to work with their hands, get them out of the cities and into the countryside where they actually have to learn to fend for themselves and work with machines and work with technology. Work backwards and get young people on board. And then work forward with a vision of the future that has the skills trades not on a sidebar, not on a, yes, you can have your universities, and we should also have skilled trades. North America needs an active, successful skilled trades sector. They need apprenticeships as the absolute core of that. Your job, essentially, is fundamental to the economic future of North America. Not to put any pressure on you, not to make things too difficult, but the reality of it is, if you do not produce the apprenticeships, the businesses will fail, the prosperity will decline, and the whole region will suffer, economically, socially, politically, and culturally. What you are doing is giving North America, in your case, America, a chance to compete on the global scale, a chance to be world leaders again, a chance to show that the skills, trades, and the abilities of young people and middle-aged people who are working in these skilled trades can actually create prosperity of the highest possible level in the world. I leave it in your capable hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We don't have time for questions.
That's
so
okay.